A handsome, dark-haired man in a regal uniform holds her hand, proposing marriage with a confident smile. The scene shifts to a past life where a woman in a business suit died from overwork. Reborn, she finds herself as a white-haired bride in a beautiful gown, utterly shocked by her new situation. Standing at the altar, she panics internally, questioning why everyone is dressed in medieval attire. Her confusion deepens as the priest calls her by a name she doesn't recognize, Viaje. She realizes she's trapped inside a romance fantasy novel titled The Dragon and Rose Legend. The novel's story centers on Salem, a royal who is the incarnation of a dragon. The novel's plot is about the Saint Irene's love story, while Viaje's role is merely a supporting character designed to be a victim of the villain, Ramsul. A flashback reveals Viaje's birth to her father, Baron Rembrandt, and a maid. As an illegitimate child, Viaje's maid mother was brutally tortured to death by the Baron's jealous legal wife. Young Viaje was tormented and had a drug poured on her, turning her beautiful hair an eerie white. The legal wife's torment continued relentlessly, but Viaje was kept alive for a specific purpose. The cruel legal wife smiles, revealing she kept Viaje alive because she was still useful. Viaje's purpose is revealed, a political marriage arranged to secure the Rembrandt family's future. Her fiancé is Count Ardman, a man of lower status but wealthy and successful in diplomacy. The legal wife reveals her true plan, ordering Viaje to give her new husband a special liquor. Her command is clear: kill Count Ardman. The wife promises protection, claiming Viaje's worth depends on it. The scheme was meticulous, with a forged suicide note prepared in advance to cover up the murder. But the villain Ramsul already knew everything about the Rembrandt family's plot and Viaje's predicament. Ramsul used the plot to execute Viaje and her entire family, a memory that terrifies the newly reincarnated Viaje as she realizes she's living that same fate. A wave of cold dread washes over her as the pieces click into place. She panics, realizing that if Count Ardman dies tonight, she will be executed immediately, just like in the novel. A maid snaps her back to reality, harshly reminding her of her low status as an illegitimate child. Viaje tries to refuse, but the maid insists she has no right, as fulfilling her duty is in order. The maid leaves to inform the Count, mockingly telling Viaje to pray her wedding night ends quickly. A sharp gasp escapes her as the door closes, leaving her alone to face her terrible fate. Knowing how the story goes, she resolves to survive by getting the Count drunk with different wine and then escaping. Her plan seems to be working, as Count Ardman is already happily flushed from drinking. Inwardly creeped out, Viaje forces a smile, thinking his behavior is a joke as she continues to pour. The Count loves the wine and demands another cup, while Viaje feigns pleasure, urging him to drink more slowly. She tries to stop him from drinking so fast, but it's too late. He chokes with a sudden, pained ugh. She stares in stunned disbelief as her plan takes an unexpected and horrifying turn. The Count lets out a final gasp and collapses to the floor as Viaje cries out his name in terror. Staring at his lifeless body, she wonders how he could be dead. She never gave him the poisoned wine. Alerted by the crash, a butler bursts in, crying out for his lord and demanding to know what happened. The butler's shock turns to accusation as he immediately suspects Viaje of poisoning the wine. He dismisses the idea, declaring the nation's best drinker wouldn't collapse so easily, and shouts for the guards. With a sharp clatter of armor, the guards arrive, their faces grim and unreadable. Viaje listens in horror as the butler reveals that His Majesty Ramsul is scheduled to visit tomorrow. Surrounded by guards, she realizes with dawning terror that everything is happening exactly as it did in the novel. Blaming herself for not predicting his behavior, she desperately forms a new plan: win over Ramsul, the very man who holds her life in his hands. The next day, an icy chill seems to emanate from the grand estate as judgment awaits. Now in shackles, Viaje awaits her fate with quiet, somber resignation. She looks up to see the man from her nightmares, the villainous tyrant Ramsul, seated before her. Viaje recalls his history from the novel Ramsul Gregonia, uncle to the protagonist Salem, who killed his own brother to seize the throne and become a ruthless tyrant. As the ultimate villain of the story, his overwhelming presence makes her blush despite her fear. Well, he is handsome for a tyrant. Despite her chains, she looks him in the eye and declares her innocence, stating she did not kill the Earl. Amused, Ramsul leans forward, challenging her to explain how she is not guilty. In a desperate bid for her life, she offers him a deal: spare her, and she will grant his desire. Her bold proposition catches him off guard, and he asks with sudden interest what she could possibly offer. She tells Ramsul she can give him the very thing he's been searching for all these years. In shackles, Viaje looks up with desperate hope, pinning her survival on this one claim. Ramsul's interest is piqued, and he smirks with calculating amusement at her bold proposition. Fiahe watches him nervously, a single drop of sweat betraying her fear beneath a determined facade. The story of the Gregonia kingdom, ruled by Ramsul, began 500 years ago. Long ago, the land was terrorized by a fierce dragon, and the people lived in constant fear. A maiden explained the dragon's rage stemmed from never having known healing. With gentle power, the maiden taught the dragon the meaning of healing, soothing its monstrous heart. Though the dragon's bloodline gained human form, it came with a curse, a dragon's disease that drove royals into uncontrollable, destructive rages that were initially manageable. But over time, the attacks worsened until the afflicted could no longer restrain their violent urges. Once the disease reached its critical stage, the victims were killed to stop their rampage. Back in the present, Fiahe recalls that the novel never elaborated further on this grim history. She realizes her trump card. The tyrant Ramsul must be desperate to find a cure for this disease. Ramsul scoffs, dismissing her claim as the desperate nonsense of a woman trying to escape death. Fiahe thinks to herself that, as she expected, winning his trust won't be easy. Steeling herself, she clutches her hands, preparing to make her case against all odds. Court nobles whisper in shock, amazed that the supposedly slow-witted girl repeatedly defies Ramsul, with one wondering if she possesses clairvoyance. Fiahe boldly claims to have foreseen these events and challenges him to test her knowledge. She wagers her life, proposing that he believe her if she knows a secret only he could know. Ramsul listens intently, his expression unreadable as he considers her daring challenge. Fiahe knows this is a huge gamble, praying his question is something she read in the novel. With a wicked grin, Ramsul poses his test. Who was the last person I stabbed to death? She starts to answer, recalling the last battle, before a crucial detail clicks into place. She realizes the phrase stabbed to death is a specific detail only the royal family would know. With a gasp of realization, she correctly names his elder brother, Irie-sama, who succumbed to dragon's disease. She internally confirms that the novel explicitly stated Ramsul had to stab his berserk brother. A wave of panic hits her as she fears she was wrong and will be stabbed as punishment. Shing! Ramsul draws his sword as she closes her eyes in despair, believing it's the end. With a soft click, he sheathes his sword, admitting that she actually got it right. Relieved, Fiahe thinks her next step is to tell him when the Maiden of Healing will appear. Ramsul suddenly takes her hand with a dazzling smile, making a shocking counterproposal. How about becoming my wife? Stunned, she realizes she's just traded an execution for an immediate remarriage. Ramsul internally reveals his true motive. He wants to pass her clairvoyant bloodline to the royal family. Fiahe looks at him, realizing with a sinking feeling that he still doesn't fully trust her. She clutches her head in disbelief, wondering how this fantasy world can be so crazy. She laments that even in this world, a sudden remarriage for a widow is frowned upon. When an aide objects, Ramsul silences him with a sharp command, and the man hastily apologizes. She understands he's forcing the marriage through, ignoring all opposition from his court. His domineering smirk confirms it. Ramsul is a true tyrant in every sense of the word. The scene shifts to a royal carriage, traveling through a sun-dappled forest. Inside, Fiahe and Ramsul sit across from each other in a heavy, silent atmosphere. Feeling the tension, Fiahe resolves to break the awkward silence between them. She attempts small talk, cheerfully commenting on how lovely the weather is today. Ramsul glances away, appearing to ignore her attempt at conversation completely. He turns back, crossing his arms and studying her thoughtfully, but remains silent. Looking at his profile, Fiahe is momentarily distracted, thinking he's breathtakingly handsome. She shakes her head vigorously, scolding herself for forgetting he's a ruthless, cruel tyrant. A flashback shows Ramsul standing with a bloodied sword after mercilessly slaughtering his enemies. She remembers he is a man who kills without distinction, and will discard her if she's no longer useful. Determined, she decides she cannot walk this dangerous tightrope and must find another way to survive. Ramsul rests his head on his hand, a slight knowing smile on his face as he watches her. Caught staring, Fiahe flinches as he asks if there's something on his face. He thinks to himself that while he expected a dull journey, she is making it far from boring. Fiahe puffs out her cheeks, internally fuming that he's a terrible man for finding her face amusing. An aide reports their journey is halted, as landslides from recent bad weather have buried the road. With no other option, Ramsul gives the order to set up camp for the night, Fiage panics at the thought of sleeping outdoors, completely exposed to the elements. Ramsul tells her a tent will be prepared and instructs her to wait outside for food to be served. Surprised by his unexpected thoughtfulness, she thanks him and wonders if she misjudged him. Her thoughts turn bleak as she considers her scandalous reputation as a recently widowed, illegitimate child. She touches her eerie white hair, concluding her strange appearance only makes her situation worse. Later, she dozes off in a tent, seemingly at peace for a moment. A bloody premonition flashes through her mind as she worries that marrying the despised tyrant will only put her in greater danger. She's startled awake as Ramsul pulls back the tent flap, asking if she's asleep. She quickly denies it, her heart pounding as she assumes he's checking to see if she's escaped. Seeing an opportunity, she sits up and tells him she has something she needs to discuss. Ramsul stands over her with a smirk, asking what she wants to talk about. She nervously questions his marriage proposal, insisting someone like her isn't fit to be his wife. She makes a counteroffer to serve as a servant in his castle until the Maiden of Healing appears. His expression turns icy as he asks when she gained the status to give him opinions, and his cold stare silences her. Fiage cries out in shock as Ramsul suddenly starts taking off his jacket, revealing his muscular physique. Flustered and blushing, she demands to know why he's undressing. She asks in disbelief why he's taking his clothes off in here. As he gets into bed, she watches in confusion, wondering what he's thinking before remembering his marriage proposal. He pulls her into a close embrace, tenderly kissing her forehead in a romantic vision. Back in reality, he explains this is his tent, and none were left for her, then asks if she'd prefer sleeping with the knights. Defeated, she reluctantly agrees to sleep in his tent. The camp is quiet under the night sky as the scene transitions. Lying stiffly beside him, Fiage despairs that she can't possibly sleep peacefully next to a tyrant. Her anxiety spirals as she imagines bandits attacking their camp despite the guards. She bites her nails, her mind racing with fear. She glances over at Ramsul, who appears to be sleeping beside her. As she tries to sleep, a shout of "bandits" erupts, jolting them both awake while guards outside scramble to respond. Stunned, Fiage can't believe her worst fears have come true and bandits are actually attacking. A bandit leader bursts into the tent, noting it seems less guarded than he expected. Ramsul protectively shields Fiage, his eyes glowing with red fury as the bandit recoils in shock. Eek! In a flash, Ramsul grabs his sword and lunges forward to confront the intruders. Arg, a bandit, cries out as he falls, and Fiage watches in awe, thinking Ramsul is incredible. Clutching a candelabra for light, she notes with amazement that he took down 3 attackers in a single swing. His back to her, Ramsul gets her attention with a simple, "Hey." He turns around with a confident smile, running a hand through his hair like a conquering hero. The aide rushes in to apologize, reporting that all the intruding bandits have been captured. The aide notices Ramsul's good mood and cautiously asks if something happened. Phew. Fiage collapses onto the bed, utterly drained and relieved the ordeal is over. She reflects on the awful night, realizing that if Ramsul hadn't been there, she would have been killed by the bandits. The terrifying realization of how close she came to death hits her hard. Her thoughts drift to an image of a kind, purple-haired man in a white uniform extending his hand. Her resolve hardens as she decides she must get away from Ramsul as soon as possible. She lies down, still clutching the candelabra, her mind now set on a new plan. Now holding the candelabra, Ramsul smirks, wryly commenting that while he told her to relax, he didn't expect her to actually fall asleep. While seemingly asleep, Fiage firms her resolve, thinking she must escape from Ramsul. Unbeknownst to her, Ramsul is awake and smirks, challenging her internally to try her best. The scene shifts to a grand, sunlit cathedral where a blonde woman stands before a lectern. The blonde noblewoman learns with shock that His Majesty Ramsul has gotten engaged. Now at the palace, Fiage stands quietly, her expression unreadable as she contemplates her new reality. The view pans over the sprawling royal capital, dominated by a magnificent castle on a hill. Looking out from her carriage, Fiage gasps in delight, marveling at the sight of the royal capital. On the street, a terrified mother shushes her child, warning him not to look at the terrifying king's carriage. Fiage observes the fearful faces of the common people from her carriage window. She recalls that in the novel, Ramsul of Gorgonia ruled with such military terror that even nobles feared for their lives. As Ramsul sits with an imposing glare, Fiage confirms to herself that the citizens truly fear him. Arriving inside, she looks around in awe, impressed by the grandeur of the fantasy world palace. Her eyes land on a handsome man with light purple hair, and she instantly recognizes him as Salem, the novel's protagonist. She remembers his story. Salem, son of Irene and rightful heir, is known as the dragon's incarnation. Piaget watches Salem with admiration, thinking of his admirable bravery in fighting tyranny for the people. Her admiration is cut short when Ramzul suddenly introduces her to a stunned Salem as his fiancé. Ha! Salem stares back, his expression a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. An icy silence falls as Salem glares daggers at Piaget, who stands frozen before him. Salem thinks grimly to himself that Ramzul is just going to kill her too. He coldly dismisses Piaget, asking if that was all she wanted to say before turning away. Ramzul tells her it's time to go, leaving a bewildered and anxious Piaget behind. A profile card identifies the purple-haired man as Salem Gregonia, the protagonist of the novel. The story's plot is revealed. Salem is destined to defeat Ramzul and become the new king. Piaget watches Salem's retreating back, thinking that, as expected, he clearly hates Ramzul. She droops in despair, realizing this part of the world follows the novel's plot exactly. Sighing, she resigns herself to the fact that Salem will naturally dislike her as Ramzul's fiancé. Led into a lavishly decorated room, Piaget can't help but admire its beauty. Ramzul watches her reaction with an amused, knowing smirk. Refusing to be intimidated, Piaget puffs out her cheeks, silently telling herself she's perfectly fine. She recognizes the man approaching them as Terren, the Chancellor, another character from the novel. She recalls that Terren is Ramzul's childhood friend, and the only person who dares speak to him freely. Terren immediately confronts Ramzul, demanding to know why he made such a reckless decision after rejecting so many other marriage proposals. As the Chancellor calls the remarriage insane, Piaget silently cheers him on, hoping he'll talk Ramzul out of it. Terren kindly turns to Piaget, telling her to seek him or the headmaid for help, and she meekly agrees. Terren continues to express his concern, while Ramzul stands by with his arms crossed, unmoved. Ramzul cuts the conversation short, stating he wishes to speak with Piaget alone. He turns to face her, causing her to startle with a worried look. Her heart pounds as she nervously wonders if she did something to anger him. Gulp. She swallows hard, her wide eyes filled with trepidation as he approaches. She gulps again, her anxiety mounting as she faces him alone. Ramzul pins her against the wall, getting straight to the point. Can your clairvoyant see where the Maiden of Healing is? In a cute, chibi-style thought, she grumbles that she's not some kind of information kiosk. A brief, silhouetted vision of the prophesied hero and maiden holding hands flashes in her mind. Composing herself, Piaget clasps her hands, deciding she needs to handle this information very carefully. She carefully reveals a key detail. The maiden's most distinctive feature is her beautiful, pale pink hair. Ramzul looks unimpressed, demanding to know if that's all she can tell him. Sigh, he rubs his forehead in frustration, complaining that clairvoyance isn't as powerful as he'd hoped, and asking if she can't see more. Feigning weakness, Piaget explains that overusing her power could kill her, so she can only see things in small pieces. Ramzul considers her words, then concedes that it can't be helped. Piaget marvels internally that he so readily accepted her excuse about clairvoyance, drawing from life energy, a typical fantasy world trope. Ramzul tells Piaget it would be a problem if she died, then orders her to report any visions of the Maiden of Healing. He declares that as his fiancée, she may ask for anything she desires. Piaget reflects on the lavish gifts he could provide, acknowledging that he is, after all, the king. Ramzul glances back, awaiting her request. Taking him at his word, Piaget asks if they can reconsider their marriage. She tries to explain her reasoning, stating that he must be aware of the situation. Amused, Ramzul holds her chin, calling her a strange woman and noting that marrying him should be an honor. He suddenly sweeps her into a spin, leaving her utterly shocked as he simply smiles. Piaget blushes, caught completely off guard by his bold move. As he continues to spin her around, a dizzy Piaget begs him to stop. Ramzul smirks, telling her to stop insisting on calling off the marriage. Overwhelmed and dizzy, she quickly concedes, "Okay, I understand." Victorious, Ramzul stops, smoothly adjusting his uniform. He smugly tells her to let this be a lesson and make a more reasonable request next time. Pouting, Piaget fumes internally, wondering why he'd offer if he wasn't going to grant her wish. Exhausted from the encounter, she flops onto a plush magenta couch. Hugging a pillow, she decides to take a moment to organize her knowledge of the novel. She recalls Salem, realizing the once righteous hero from the book has a hidden darkness. Piaget remembers Ramsul, still puzzled by his decision to marry a widow so quickly. She thinks of Terran, the Chancellor and the only person who can speak to Ramsul as an equal. Her mind drifts to a montage of the novel's main characters, trying to place everyone. Clutching the pillow, she sits up, looking worried and deep in thought. A vision of a bloody sword flashes in her mind as she recalls lying about clairvoyance to survive. She worries that by disrupting the story, the main plot she knows might change completely. Fiahe recalls the novel's original heroine, the Maiden of Healing, who was supposed to save Salem. Determined, she brushes her hair in the mirror, preparing for what's next. Her attention is drawn to a large suitcase that has been placed on her bed. Inside, she finds a luxurious dress and sparkling accessories. She briefly panics, flustered by the sudden turn of events. Turning around, she sees Terran and gives him a grateful smile. He presents the suitcase to her, a formal and thoughtful delivery. Admiring herself in a new dress, Piaget notes she didn't have other clothes after being brought here so suddenly. She examines a beautiful necklace, surprised that the Tyrant King could be so considerate. A small chibi version of her ponders this unexpectedly kind side of Ramsul. As she fastens the necklace, she begins to think about the person she is about to meet. She recalls that in the original novel, Romaine was Salem's most trusted advisor. Furthermore, with the support of her father, the Pope, Romaine was widely beloved as a saint. Fiahe remembers that Romaine was admired by all as a beautiful and pure-hearted woman. Finishing getting ready, she wonders why such a revered person would want to meet with her. She pictures the gentle scene from the novel of Romaine caring for Salem. With a determined look, Piaget resolves that her first move must be to reassure Romaine. She puts on her most confident and cheerful smile, psyching herself up for the meeting. Arriving at a sunny veranda, she spots the blonde woman and thinks, "Is that Romaine?" Gasp! She is immediately taken aback by Romaine's appearance. A tiny, chibi version of her squeals internally. She's so tiny. Romaine gracefully adjusts an earring, her demeanor calm and elegant. Piaget is left speechless, completely in awe of Romaine's beauty. Romaine offers a gentle smile and formally greets Fiahe-sama. Dazzled, Piaget shields her eyes, thinking how adorable her smile is, and realizing this is the famous Saint Romain. Romaine greets Piaget with a dazzling, cheerful smile. The warm greeting leaves Piaget completely baffled and confused. Romaine expresses pity, noting how difficult Piaget's life must have been in a place without books. Piaget internally corrects her, remembering she only became this person partway through her life. Romaine continues her pity party, saying it breaks her heart to think how Piaget was shunned for her rare hair color. She concludes her speech with another seemingly sweet and innocent smile. She then generously offers her unwavering support, telling Piaget to rely on her for anything. Piaget internally questions Romaine's sincerity, feeling that the supposed saint is subtly looking down on her with every word. As Romaine gives a strained smile, Piaget silently begs for the uncomfortable tea party to be over. Just then, Terran arrives and formally apologizes for interrupting their conversation. His interruption heralds the grand entrance of King Ramsul, looking regal and stoic. Piaget quickly stands, a look of surprised relief on her face at the king's arrival. Piaget is stunned, realizing Romaine, who hadn't stood for her, is now giving Ramsul a full, formal curtsy. While acknowledging Ramsul's status as king, Piaget can't shake the feeling that something about Romaine's selective respect is wrong. A sly smile crosses Piaget's face as she begins to connect the dots. She wonders if the saintly Romaine has a hidden side, just as Ramsul calls out to her. Startled from her thoughts, Piaget turns and stammers a quick, "Yes!" Ramsul looks at her intently and commands her to come to his office. As he turns to leave, Piaget hesitates, murmuring a worried, "But Romaine-sama." Regaining her composure, she puts on a polite smile for those remaining. With a graceful curtsy, she formally excuses herself from the king's presence. Left behind, Ramon's polite facade drops, replaced by a look of clear annoyance. Piaget trails behind Ramsul, her gaze fixed on him as they walk away. Her eyes narrow with suspicion, as she desperately hopes she's just overthinking things. A sudden, shocking possibility dawns on her. Could it be that Romaine is actually in love with Ramsul? Noticing her stare, Ramsul glances back over his shoulder and asks what's wrong. She forces an awkward smile, internally screaming that she just wants a break from all the drama. The scene transitions, showing an ornate lamp inside a royal carriage. A coachman expertly guides the carriage, pulling it away from the estate. Inside, Remain fumes, wondering how Ramsul could marry such an unsophisticated woman. Her face contorts with rage as she seethes, refusing to accept that a lowly commoner will become queen instead of her. Back in the king's office, Ramsul, Fiage, and Tareen sit down for a serious discussion. Ramsul gets straight to the point, bringing up the matter of their wedding. Fiage thinks she knew this was coming, wondering why he's in such a hurry to proceed. With a jolt of determination, she realizes this might be her last chance to influence events. Fiage stands abruptly to speak, but Tareen cuts in, urging His Majesty to pause the discussion for a moment. Tareen reminds the king that royal marriages require the church's approval, a consent they cannot obtain without the Holy Pope at the church council. While Fiage feels relieved by the delay, Ramsul scoffs at the notion, darkly questioning why he should need anyone's permission. A jolt of fear runs through Fiage, shocked by his blatant disregard for the rules. Tareen desperately pleads with the king, insisting it's just the way things are, and begging him to follow the rule for once. Fiage is floored by the revelation that the powerful church's approval is merely a formality for the king. Tareen smoothly takes control, announcing he'll contact the church and tabling the discussion for now. Standing alone, Fiage feels a wave of relief, grateful that the church council has bought her some more time. She realizes with dawning horror that the king is dead serious about passing the clairvoyant bloodline into the royal family. She panics, crying out internally that if the marriage proceeds, her lie about having clairvoyance will surely be exposed. Frozen with anxiety, she desperately wonders what she can possibly do now. Her thoughts turn to the regal and severe-looking Salem, surrounded by an aura of blue roses. Turning, she finds the real Salem standing before her, and she quietly speaks his name. Salem simply gives her a curt nod of acknowledgement before turning away. Flustered, she thinks, just a nod, and while they aren't close, she feels there should have been more to his greeting. She resolves that, just in case she needs to build a better relationship with him. A disgusted Salem scoffs at the idea of engaging with her, while Fiage stammers in surprise. He coldly dismisses her, muttering, "Spare me." Looking down on her, he internally scorns her for her lowly birth, unsightly appearance, and shamelessness in marrying Ramsul. He smirks at the repulsive thought of someone like her becoming queen, leaving Fiage utterly speechless. Stung by his insults, she remembers that even in the novel, Salem was cruel to Ramsul's fiancée. She recalls the novel's depiction of a kind, charming prince, baffled by the stark contrast. Her hands clench into fist as she decides she refuses to tolerate his insults in silence. Salem tells her she doesn't belong there and orders her to pack her things and leave immediately. He turns to walk away, leaving Fiage standing in the hall. She startles him by grabbing his arm, refusing to let him leave. With a bright smile, she reminds him that a conversation requires more than one person. She holds her ground, determined to speak with the surprised Salem. "What are you doing?" he demands, shocked by her audacity. He smirks, thinking his words should have shut her down, but she begins a fiery retort. A jagged thought bubble reveals her fury. She has no reason to tolerate his insults. "Ha!" Fiage yells back at him, leaving Salem completely stunned by her defiance. She begins to explain her situation, noting her connection to Ramsul. She reveals she's a widow accused of murdering her former husband, with a background far beneath Ramsul's. Touching her white hair, she adds that her unique appearance is likely another source of resentment. She points at him, passionately arguing against judging people solely based on their status. Her direct confrontation leaves Salem looking completely taken aback. She lectures him that as a representative of the people, he has a duty to be more mindful of his words. Overwhelmed by her speech, Salem covers his mouth, his face flushing in embarrassment. Fiage pauses, caught off guard by his reaction and thinking he suddenly looks cute. She wonders what his strange reaction means, a new possibility dawning on her. Horrified, she covers her own mouth, realizing she may have gone too far. He abruptly turns away as she looks on in confusion. She watches in disbelief as he walks away without another word. She recalls the novel's description of Salem as a kind, compassionate, and righteous protagonist. Sighing in defeat, she laments that her idealized image of the protagonist has been completely shattered. Meanwhile, Ramsul calmly walks away down the hall. Salem stands alone, clenching his fists in flustered frustration. He remains visibly embarrassed and agitated after their confrontation. He thinks back on their argument, admitting he never expected her to be able to respond to his harsh words. To his own surprise, he acknowledges that her points were completely valid. Clutching his chest, he questions the strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring within him. He walks away, miserably concluding that today is the worst day ever. From a distance, Ramsul watches Salem's departure with a sly, knowing smirk. Salem flinches, feeling the weight of an unseen gaze. Staring at Salem's flustered retreat, Fiage wonders if Ramsul's cold stare means he truly hates him that much. Ramsul's smug expression contrasts with Salem's awkwardness as they stand in the same hall. Salem glares, thinking to himself that Ramsul never says anything. Standing alone on a balcony, Salem looks out pensively. He watches from above as Ramsul interacts with a small, blonde-haired boy in the gardens below. Memory surfaces of a younger Salem, brushing his longer hair back from his face. He flashes back to a happy childhood memory, holding hands with his smiling parents. The memory darkens to him as a lonely child clutching a toy, hinting at a tragedy that followed. A horrifying vision reveals Ramsul standing over the bloody bodies of his parents, the one who destroyed his happiness. He recalls the brutal truth. Ramsul killed his mother and father, branding him a demon in his eyes. Seething with rage, Salem's fist tightens against a wall. He snarls in fury, vowing to himself that he will kill Ramsul with his own hands. The scene shifts as Fiage arrives at another part of the castle. Entering a room, she timidly announces her presence, wondering why she was summoned so suddenly. Lying on her bed, Fiage reflects on the past few peaceful days, relieved that Ramsul's duties have kept him from pushing the marriage. And yet, her peace is interrupted as she peeks into a room where Ramsul is meeting with a blonde-haired woman. Ramsul sits with his arms crossed, listening with a stern expression. Fiage internally scoffs, realizing the woman only acts polite in front of Ramsul, and thinking she's not very clever. Fiage nervously offers a formal greeting to the woman, addressing her as Romane-sama. Ramsul acknowledges her, stating that the church has a proposal to make before the council. Fiage learns that this man is the Pope, the father of Saintus Romain, and a highly respected figure. He is known as a compassionate man who treats everyone with kindness, regardless of their status. Romain begins to speak, explaining that an ominous sign appeared concerning the king's marriage. She recounts how a holy statue began to weep tears of blood during a ritual, leaving her to draw her own conclusions. Ramsul listens to the tale, his expression unreadable. Roman relays the church's judgment. A widow marrying the king is a betrayal, and Fiage's ominous hair color makes her unworthy of divine blessing. Smiling sweetly, Romain concludes that the Pope and the church have decided it's too difficult to proceed with the council. Fiage realizes Romane is here to formally reject her, but senses there's a hidden motive as well. With a sharp sound, Ramsul suddenly stands up, simply saying he understands. As Romane smugly begins to confirm his understanding, a sword suddenly flashes before her eyes, stopping her mid-sentence in terror. The gleaming blade of the sword rests just inches from her chest. A terrified Romain stammers Ramsul's title as he holds his sword to her throat. Ramsul scoffs, thinking this was a waste of time, while a panicked Fiage looks on in horror. He smirks, thinking that the royal family bows to no god and the church has always been a nuisance. Fiage panics, completely at a loss for what to do in this terrifying situation. She thinks that while Romain was infuriating, threatening her with a sword is going way too far. Just in time, Tareen rushes in, begging Ramsul to lower his sword and warning him not to make an enemy of the church. Fiage breathes a sigh of relief, thankful that Tareen arrived to stop him. Ramsul glares with cold fury, unmoved by the interruption. A shaken Romain quickly apologizes for her impudence, admitting she overstepped her bounds. Ramsul ominously declares that sacrifices are necessary for his goals and tells her to deliver a message to her father. He threatens that if the church doesn't want to be destroyed, they will hurry up and hold the council. Terrified, Romain quickly agrees to relay the threatening message to her father. As Romain leaves with a parting glare of hatred, Fiage watches, still processing the shocking confrontation. Ramsul turns to Fiage, calmly apologizing for the pointless conversation she had to witness. Fiage lets out a long, weary sigh. Walking through the garden, she reflects that the council is now inevitable and just for show, meaning no one can oppose her marriage to Ramsul. In desperation, she considers her last resort, lying that she had a vision of her marriage bringing disaster to Salem. Her thoughts are interrupted when she notices an unfamiliar area deeper in the garden. She walks down a beautiful, sunlit garden path. Startled, she stops in her tracks, realizing someone else is there. It's Ramsul, standing alone with his arms crossed. She sits beside him on a bench, an awkward silence hanging between them. With puffed cheeks, She resolves to break the silence and start a conversation. Mustering her courage, Piaget asks him directly why he is so determined to marry her. She immediately regrets her blunt question, realizing he's in a bad mood and would never reveal his true intentions. She looks at him, puzzled by his lack of response. Ramsul clenches his fist, his expression hardening with intense emotion. Piaget sits nervously, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she awaits his answer. He leans in close, asking a completely unexpected question about Salem, leaving her utterly stunned. Ramsul recalls his past, remembering that his older brother doted on him despite their age gap. However, their bond was frowned upon by court officials who saw them as rivals for the throne. As a child uninterested in politics, Ramsul simply wanted to live peacefully. He explains a cruel royal tradition of emotional distance between parents and children to avoid attachment. The only hope for the royal family's curse is the legendary Maiden of Healing. This savior is a rare figure, appearing only once every few hundred years. Rather than clinging to that faint hope, royals would choose death to entrust the kingdom to the next generation. In a shocking memory, his blood-spattered brother asks who Ramsul is, while a younger Ramsul stares in horror at the blood. He recalls the tragedy. When their father's disease worsened, his brother killed him and ascended the throne. Ramsul remembers trying to calm the public, determined to prevent fear and unrest from spreading. He had told his brother they would hold a grand funeral as a final act of respect for their father. His brother had simply agreed to the plan. His brother's own disease symptoms seemed mild, and he believed he had decades left to rule. The memory shifts to a newborn Salem, cooing peacefully in his crib. Ramsul remembers looking down at the infant, a silent, uncertain observer. A tender moment is recalled as his hand reaches out to the baby's tiny one. The baby Salem giggles happily, grasping his finger with a small hand. The connection startles Ramsul, a new feeling dawning in his eyes. In another memory, a gentle hand pats a young, white-haired Salem on the head. A long-haired Ramsul smiles warmly at the young boy, showing their growing bond. As Ramsul achieved more military victories, their relationship began to sour. More and more people began to support the idea of him becoming king instead of his brother. He remembers his brother's behavior slowly changing as the pressure mounted. Ramsul recalls trying to reassure his brother, insisting he held no ambition for the throne. His brother had simply smiled, saying Ramsul would make a stronger king. Distressed, Ramsul had begged his brother not to joke about such things. He watches his brother walk away, believing he was just struggling with the political strain. Crash. The narration darkens as he remembers the day everything changed. He recalls hearing a sudden, alarming sound that made him turn back in confusion. Peeking around a doorway, he calls out to his brother in concern. He remembers the horrifying sight of his brother, in a frenzy, attacking his own wife. He realized then that his brother's disease had secretly reached a critical stage. In the memory, he desperately wrestles with his brother, managing to stop the attack. Ramsul kneels in disbelief as his brother holds his slain wife, murmuring a horrified, "No." Crying tears of blood, his brother stares in shock, asking what he has done. Why? As his brother collapses in grief, Ramsul stands over him in grim silence. The narration explains that seeing what he'd done to his wife drove his brother into complete madness. He remembers his brother kneeling on the floor, clutching his wife's lifeless body in utter despair. In that state of madness, his brother made one final, desperate request. He begged Ramsul to kill him, terrified he would harm young Salem next in his frenzy. With a horrified look, Ramsul listens to his brother's final plea. "Kill me." He remembers the moment he was forced to kill his own brother. With his dying breath, his brother thanked him and begged him to take care of Salem. Standing over the two bodies with a bloodied sword, Ramsul understood the terrible burden he now carried. Back in the present, Ramsul concludes that if Salem hates him, it will be easier for him to one day kill him. He looks at Piaget, thinking that finding a cure for Dragon's disease would free Salem from ever facing this burden. This is why, he resolves, he must find the Maiden of Healing as soon as possible. Piaget stares back, stunned by the tragic revelation behind his actions. She clenches her fists, angrily telling him he should have just explained, as she would have helped regardless. Ramsul simply smiles and rejects her offer without a second thought. Ha! Ramsul explains that he couldn't possibly trust someone he just met. He continues with a smirk, adding that he certainly couldn't leave a child with her. Flustered and blushing, Piaget is rendered speechless by his reasoning. She reluctantly concedes that he has a point. Ramsul continues to speak, his expression softening slightly. Piaget looks back at him, utterly confused by his words. He teases her, asking if she'd grab a candlestick again to defend herself, causing her to stammer. Smiling, Ramsul admits that it's rare to see someone who actually fights for themselves. He turns away, noting the setting sun and telling her it's time to head inside. Following him, Fiage reflects on this new, vulnerable side of him, realizing his ruthlessness was just a facade. Ramsul walks ahead, his expression somber as he leads the way. Fiage trails behind, wondering if it's strange to feel this new way about him. The scene shifts to a distraught Romaine, who is being thanked for her cooperation. Overwhelmed with rage, Romaine screams, demanding to know why. Crash. She smashes a vase of flowers in a fury, raging that she wasn't chosen to be Ramsul's bride. She seethes, considering Fiage a sewer rat, and vowing to stop their marriage no matter what. A sinister smile spreads across her face as she concocts a new plan. She'll use the child. A flashback shows a young Romaine being told how exquisite she is. Surrounded by adoring maids, the young Romaine giggles with delight. She recalls that as the Pope's daughter, she could have had anything she ever wanted. Her father, the Pope, affectionately tells a young Romaine that kindness will be returned in kind. He advises her that to gain the goodwill of others, she must first be a good person herself. A young Romani listens to her father's teachings, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The scene transitions to a memory of a bustling town square. She recalls the townspeople expressing their gratitude for her personally serving them meals. Dressed in a humble cloak, Romaine remembers trying to be a good person, just as her father taught. Her memory is interrupted as a young boy trips, spilling his food on the ground. The boy gratefully thanks the saintess. Romaine smiles, basking in his gratitude. She reflects on how people began to revere her as a saintess for her good deeds. Standing before her bowing followers, she revels in the delightful feeling of being worshipped. A crazed look takes over her face as she internally demands more devotion, fame, and worship. In the present, her thoughts drift to the empty seat beside King Ramsul on the throne. A sly smile plays on her lips as she eyes her prize. Her eyes gleam with ambition as she fiercely claims that position is rightfully hers. She pictures Fiage, thinking her rival's existence would make all her past efforts worthless. With a cruel, determined smile, she resolves to eliminate her rival no matter the cost. Reflected in a small jar, she affirms that she must do whatever it takes to achieve her goal. The scene shifts to Romaine having tea with a young silver-haired man, Salem. Romaine smiles as she chats with Salem over tea. Salem seems surprised by her words, letting out a soft ah. He concedes that what she said is true. Salem wonders aloud what Ramsul could possibly be thinking by deciding to marry a woman he just met. Romaine looks at him intently, awaiting his further thoughts. Salem dismisses a possibility, saying it doesn't seem likely. Romane simply responds, I see, lowering her gaze demurely. She then presents a small vial, telling him, that's right, here. As he looks on, puzzled, Salem accepts the vial gratefully, explaining he was running out of the medicine he drinks at night. Salem smiles warmly, smelling a jar of what he believes is a clairvoyance-enhancing substance provided by Fiage. In a flashback, Romane approaches Salem in the garden and confirms their plan, saying, of course. Leaning in, Romaine gives a surprised Salem a quick kiss on the cheek. Romaine smiles deviously, her hand on Salem's chest as he stares back at her, seemingly unmoved. Salem offers a slight, knowing smile in response to Romaine's advances. With her plan in motion, Romani walks away with a triumphant, cheerful smile. Salem is left standing alone in the garden, holding the jar Romaine gave him. Peeking around a corner, Fiage looks surprised, wondering if she just saw Salem and Romaine together. Fiage approaches Salem, asking if he was just with Lady Romaine. She reaches for him, but he turns his back on her and walks away without a word. Fiage stands with a strained smile, internally questioning if he's ignoring her because of their status difference. Still walking away, Salem gives her a cold, dismissive good day. He brusquely excuses himself and continues walking up the stairs, leaving her behind. Fiage recalls an image from the novel of a charming Salem, holding a large bouquet of flowers. She remembers a crucial plot point. Ramsul killed Salem's father, which is the root of Salem's hatred for him. Fiage realizes that while Ramsul cares for Salem, their relationship is broken by terrible communication. Sighing in frustration, Fiage looks utterly dejected by the complicated situation. He leans in close, intimidating her as she panics and shouts, "No!" Waving her hands frantically, Fiage quickly insists that it was nothing at all. Ramsul decides to let it go, but informs her they have something to discuss. Fiage looks up in confusion, caught off guard by his sudden change in demeanor. Ramsul gives her a slight, knowing smile as he looks down at her. On the day of the church council, Fiage, in a new lavender gown, marvels at the grand church beside Ramsul. The scene focuses on the magnificent, sun-drenched altar and the Pope's throne at the head of the church. Seated in the pews, Fiage and Ramsul wait for the proceedings to begin. A man with white hair, the Pope, arrives with a pleasant smile, dressed in his formal vestments. Standing before the gathered nobles, the Pope prepares to open the council meeting. The Pope formally commences the meeting to discuss King Ramsul's marriage. Romaine abruptly stands and raises her hand, and the Pope acknowledges her by name. She states that while they understand the circumstances, she believes approving the marriage will be difficult. Holding up a white cloth, Romaine requests that the council look at what she has brought. She reveals a statue of a praying woman weeping bloody tears, leaving everyone, including Fiage, in shock. Romaine gravely warns that the bloodstains cannot be washed away, and that disaster will be irreversible. The Pope claims this is an unspeakable matter but asks for understanding, stating it's for the kingdom's sake. With a serene smile, Romaine asks for someone to be brought forward. Fiage and Ramsul are stunned to see Salem brought before the council, who himself looks flustered. Ramsul's eyes narrow with fury as the council members begin to murmur amongst themselves. Fiage watches Ramsul's frightening expression, worrying he's angry that Salem was brought into this. Romaine addresses the council, stating that she spoke with Lord Salem the other day. In a flashback, Salem holds the jar, thinking that with its contents, her clairvoyance will succeed. Romaine wonders aloud if Fiage is distressing Salem, suggesting it could cause the worst outcome, while secretly fuming that Fiage dared to ask about their marriage. Salem looks completely bewildered by Romaine's public accusations. A council member objects loudly, fearing the marriage could trigger Salem's dragon's disease. Salem recalls the painful memory of Ramsul taking his parents' lives. The crowd continues to stir, whispering anxiously about the shocking revelation. Unfazed by the commotion, Ramsul leans back and dismisses the entire spectacle as ridiculous. As Salem trembles, Ramsul glares, sensing that something is terribly wrong with him. His heart pounds as Ramsul looks on in alarm, calling out Salem's name. Ah! Salem collapses to his knees, screaming in agony as dark, thorny energy erupts from his body. Amidst the proceedings, the court officials gasp in collective shock at an unseen disturbance. Romaine looks on in horror, wondering what is happening to Salem. A brown-haired man in a white uniform panics over a collapsed Salem, crying out to see if he's all right. Surrounded by a dark aura, Salem rises with pitch-black eyes, a sinister energy emanating from him. The brown-haired man recoils in terror, recognizing the horrifying symptoms of the dragon's disease. Kia! A piercing scream fills the hall as panicked nobles, including a white-haired woman, flee the scene. Now being choked by the frenzied Salem, the brown-haired man desperately begs Ramsul for help. Romaine watches the chaos unfold, her face a mask of shocked disbelief. Ramsul's expression turns deadly serious as he assesses the dangerous situation. As Ramsul strides forward, he sees Salem violently attacking the man on the floor, while Romaine watches anxiously. Ramsul apologizes grimly before delivering a swift, precise strike that knocks the rampaging Salem unconscious. Holding the unconscious Salem, Ramsul quietly notes that a single knockout should suffice for a first onset. The Pope observes the aftermath, remarking that the incident has derailed the church council. Ramsul carries Salem away as Romaine watches, quietly acknowledging the turn of events. The scene transitions to the castle as the sun sets. Fiage sits by Salem's bedside, watching over him with a worried expression as he sleeps. She narrates that she volunteered to look after Salem, hoping there was something she could do to help. Remembering Salem's terrifying black eyes, she realizes this event didn't happen as it should have in the novel. A panel from the novel reveals that Salem was only supposed to develop dragon's disease after meeting the Maiden of Healing, Irene. Fiage frets, wondering why the storyline has shifted so dramatically and realizing she's more involved than she thought. Looking at Salem, she worries that with the plot changing, her clairvoyance may become useless. She continues her vigil by Salem's bedside as he rests. Night falls over the grand estate. Holding the now empty vial, the Pope smirks, admitting to himself that perhaps he overdid it a little. Later, Ramsul joins Fiage at Salem's bedside, both looking down at the still unconscious young man. An advisor with glasses informs Ramsul that the nobles are demanding an explanation and future plans. Ramsul gazes at his sleeping nephew, quietly thinking his name. Fiage recalls the chaos of Salem's sudden transformation during the council. She remembers Ramsul taking her hand in that moment, Thinking how terrifying the whole ordeal was, she reflects on how she was too gripped by fear to do anything, realizing seeing the disease firsthand was far worse than reading about it. She thinks about Ramsul's tireless efforts to protect Salem, even if it meant earning the boy's hatred. She realizes that despite the story's changes, Salem still ended up falling ill. Clenching her fist, she chides herself for having done nothing but focus on her own survival. With newfound determination, Fiache resolves that she now wants to help Ramsul. She's startled from her thoughts as Salem begins to stir, calling out his name in surprise. As Fiache turns to call a doctor, Salem grabs her wrist, weakly telling her not to. Still holding her hand, a weary Salem sits up and asks for some water. Fiache returns with a glass of water for the weakened Salem. She gently helps him drink, and he quietly thanks her. After he lies back down, Fiache offers to call a maid, but Salem tells her there's no need. Fiache realizes that even if his personality is different from the novel, he's likely feeling guilty and ashamed. She sympathizes with Salem, thinking if a bystander like her was so shaken, it must be so much harder for him. Ramsul appears in the doorway, his expression somber. He enters the room and asks Fiache if the nobles were all right, which she confirms. As Ramsul says they must focus on Salem's health, Salem's hand clenches into a fist beneath the sheets. Salem suddenly lashes out, accusing Ramsul of being angry about the ruined council and faking his concern. Fiache is taken aback by Salem's angry outburst. Fiache steps in, telling Salem that if the king only cared about the council, he wouldn't be by his side now. Stunned into silence, Salem stammers as Ramsul looks on, softly murmuring his name. Ramsul smiles gently, reassuring Salem to forget everything else and just focus on getting better. Later, Salem sits up in bed, his eyes shaded, and weakly states, "I got it." In the bedroom, Ramsul instructs Fiache to keep an eye on Salem's condition, to which she replies, "Understood." Fiache smiles faintly, admitting to herself that she might be a little happy about the wedding's delay. His duty done for now, Ramsul walks resolutely down the Grand Palace hallway. Ramsul internally reviews the day's events, concluding that the timing of Salem's collapse, right after he'd suspected Romain opposed the marriage, is too perfect a coincidence. A devious-looking Romain appears in his thoughts as he wonders if she somehow induced Salem's dragon's disease. He dismisses the idea, concluding that she lacks the resolve and that Salem's illness this time is a more complex matter. His expression darkens with rage as he considers the possibility of someone intentionally triggering the disease for their own benefit. As Taryn reports, the church is delaying the council due to repairs. Ramsul's eyes glow with fury as he contemplates killing them all. Fiache, overhearing him, gives a nervous smile, realizing with a chill that he wasn't joking. Narration explains that the church used Salem's condition to postpone the meeting, a request Ramsul had to accept due to its gravity for the royal family. A flashback shows a younger, happier Salem in a white uniform, smiling as he gently holds a white rabbit. The idyllic memory continues with a smiling Salem running freely, a small rabbit hopping along beside him. In the present, Salem sits alone on his bed, hunched over in silent despair. Fiache, now in a light blue gown, stands in the hallway, thinking she came to check on him because she was worried, and he's just as dejected as she expected. The scene shifts to a vibrant, sunlit rose garden. Fiache watches Ramsul's stoic profile, noting the emotional distance between the two brothers. Thinking of Salem's lonely state, she worries that Ramsul will only watch from afar instead of offering comfort. She finds Ramsul sitting alone in a garden gazebo and approaches him. Ramsul turns and acknowledges her with a quiet, "It's you." Fiache asks what he's doing here, and he simply replies that he's just thinking. With a slight complicated smile, Ramsul wonders to himself what he should do now. Fiache stands beside him, determined to help, and asks if there is anything she can do. She eagerly asks Ramsul if he knows what Salem likes, hoping to find something to comfort him, which catches the king completely off guard. Ramsul looks at her with a gentle, appreciative smile. Fiache gasps as a sudden idea strikes her. She stands before Ramsul, hands clasped, a plan forming. With a triumphant finger raised, Fiache announces she knows what to do. She recalls a scene from the novel of Salem as a crying boy beside his faceless parents, one of whom holds a rabbit. She also remembers the novel's original plot, where Salem was supposed to fall in love with a pink-haired girl named Irene at first sight. Ramsul listens to her, his expression thoughtful and pensive. Fiache enthusiastically suggests that His Majesty should give Lord Salem a baby rabbit. Ramsul deflects, saying she should give it to him, but Fiache insists the gift must come from the king. Moved by her earnestness, Ramsul smiles warmly and agrees, telling her, "I'll do as you say." The two share a moment of understanding in the gazebo. A new alliance formed. Later, Piaget greets Salem, observing that he and his new rabbit, Chappie, seem to have gotten close, to which he gives a hesitant reply. A flustered Salem apologizes to Piaget for his behavior the other day. He continues, awkwardly telling her that if she truly wishes to marry Ramsul, then Piaget listens intently as Salem tries to finish his thought, a new understanding passing between them. They stand together, the previous tension between them seemingly gone. Cuddling his rabbit, Salem decides to return to his room, explaining that the maids are too afraid to serve him anyway. With his rabbit in his arms, Salem turns and walks away down the corridor. Piaget touches the rose necklace, her expression hardening with resolve as she realizes she must act immediately. Ramsul sits at his desk, quill in hand, appearing to be contemplating his next move. Piaget decides there is someone she would like to invite to the upcoming ball. Her thoughts flash to the image of Salem meeting Irene, reinforcing her plan to bring them together. The story introduces Baron Shisha, a reclusive oddball who lives on the outskirts, avoids aristocrats, and spends his time gazing at the stars. Piaget muses on the Baron's reputation as a weirdo within high society. Ramsul looks at her with disbelief, questioning her desire to invite Baron Shisha. Piaget explains that by combining different kinds of knowledge, she believes they can figure out a solution. Piaget cheerfully declares that Baron Shisha's daughter is the healing maiden. Ramsul considers this, noting the Baron might help the clairvoyance, but has never accepted an invitation before. Piaget believes that if Salem and Irene meet, the original story will proceed, and his dragon's disease will be cured. That night, Piaget rests in her bed, gazing contently at the starry sky outside her window. The next day, as the scene pans up the palace tower, a maid informs Lady Piaget that His Majesty wishes to see her. Piaget enters a room to find Ramsul, dressed in a formal purple cape, with his back to her. Ramsul turns to face Piaget and apologizes for keeping her waiting. Looking at her lavender dress, Ramsul bluntly commands her to take it off. A shocked Piaget blushes as a brown-haired man in glasses scolds the king for his crude language. The man with glasses wipes his brow in exasperation, muttering about His Majesty's difficult personality. A flashback shows a man who resembles Ramsul escorting a woman in a yellow dress down a staircase. Piaget fumes internally, admitting that even though she knows nobles don't wear dresses twice, it still feels like a waste. The bespectacled man, flanked by smiling maids holding new clothes, cheerfully tells Lady Piaget it's time to change. Piaget stares in horror at her reflection, now wearing a dark brown and gold gown. She thinks to herself that, while Ramsul looks good in dark clothes, a thought bubble reveals that Piaget doesn't, because of her white hair. Piaget protests that it doesn't matter if the dress suits her, but Ramsul states he just wants something that fits her. Sitting down, Ramsul admits he knows nothing about clothes and simply wants something that suits Piaget. Piaget and the bespectacled man gasp in shock as she imagines a chibi Ramsul in pastels. Panicking, Piaget frets that because of her, the king will be stuck wearing a pastel color that doesn't suit him. Piaget raises her hand and nervously suggests trying pastel colors for His Majesty. A design sketch shows a formal male uniform in shades of gray and pink, with a note highlighting the cravat. Piaget nervously presents a design to Ramsul, desperately hoping he will be satisfied with it. Ramsul looks at the design with a faint smirk and gives his approval, saying, "Yeah, it's nice." Piaget and Ramsul sit together, both looking relieved as she thinks that the ordeal is finally over. The bespectacled man interrupts them, angrily asking if they really think the matter is settled. Ramsul looks at Piaget's dark dress and remarks that it wouldn't suit him. The scene shows the frustrated assistants as Ramsul and Piaget continue their discussion. The scene transitions to the exterior of a grand, golden-roofed church. A blonde woman in a blue dress stands with her hands on a desk as the narration asks how Salem got the dragon sickness. The blonde woman, Irene, worries that some people might think it was her fault. Holding papers, Irene looks up with a determined expression and says, "Thank you." An image of Salem appears, his eyes a solid, glowing black as he's surrounded by dark, thorny energy. Irene reads a letter stating that an audience with Lord Salem is forbidden, reacting with a stunned, "Oh?" She slams the letter down, angrily demanding to know what this means. Her servant apologizes, stating he doesn't know the royal family's intentions, as Irene sighs in frustration. Irene furiously crushes a cloth in her hand, thinking it's all that woman's fault for making a fool of a saint. A flashback shows Irene as the center of attention in high society, surrounded by admirers and invitations. With a vicious smirk, Irene vows to use her status as a saint to humiliate her rival. Narration introduces the Gregorian Harvest Festival, a 3-day national event beginning with a ball. The story moves to the first day of the festival, showing the grand palace under a bright sky. In the ballroom, Ramsul and Fiage are greeted by an attendee. A nervous young man with black hair thanks His Majesty for the invitation, glancing at the person beside him. Ramsul places a firm hand on Fiage's shoulder, his expression stern and possessive. Fiage forces a smile, politely telling the young man that it's nice to meet him too. The other nobles in the background look on with expressions of shock and disapproval. Fiage glances slyly at Ramsul with a mischievous smirk. Leaning in close, Ramsul whispers something to a blushing Fiage, who thinks she can feel his breath in her ear. TSK. Ramsul pulls back with a knowing look, leaving Fiage flustered. Baron Shisha, a dapper man with white hair, makes his entrance as Fiage notes with surprise that he's alone. Baron Shisha greets Fiage and Ramsul with a polite ah, while Fiage looks on with curiosity. Baron Shisha holds his hat and offers them a friendly, confident smile. Ramsul glares with suspicion at the Baron, who looks back with a hint of surprise. Fiage clasps her hands together and eagerly asks the Baron if his daughter is with him. A flustered Ramsul wonders about someone loving nature, as Fiage asks if she is coming. Baron Shisha explains that his daughter saw a wolf, decided to chase it, and didn't come back, so he arrived first. Fiage and Ramsul look horrified as she imagines a screaming Irene being pursued by a wolf, asking if it wasn't the other way around. Ramsul expresses his concern, asking the Baron if he isn't worried that his daughter may have been attacked by wolves. Fiage touches her chin thoughtfully, a worried expression on her face as she considers the situation. Ramsul gets Fiage's attention, who looks up at him with a sudden gasp of realization. Ramsul asks if Fiage is more interested in the girl than Baron Shisha, causing her to panic internally. As a realization dawns on Fiage, a concerned Ramsul asks what's wrong. Fiage realizes with a shock that there was no dragon's disease in the original novel, and the time between relapses shouldn't be this short. A sudden jolt rocks the pair as Ramsul desperately screams Salem's name. The scene cuts to a distraught Salem, hunched on the floor in a chaotic room, desperately wondering where he is. Holding a terrified Fiage, Ramsul realizes with dread that Salem might be having a dragon's disease relapse. Ramsul yells for Salem to calm down, but a dark thought bubble confirms he's already gone, showing a catatonic Salem. Ramsul holds Fiage close, both looking on with helpless shock at the unfolding crisis. In a fit of rage and despair, Salem screams that his rabbit, Chappie, is gone. Fiage and Ramsul recoil as Salem's anguish echoes through the hall. Consumed by dark energy, Salem despairs that Chappie has run away and is never coming back, worrying that his rabbit is still just a baby. Fiage stares in wide-eyed horror at the depth of Salem's complete breakdown. Ramsul shouts Fiage's name, grabbing her as she looks overwhelmed by the situation. Steeling herself, Fiage clenches her fist with newfound determination. Fiage boldly steps forward and promises the distraught Salem that she will find Chappie. The scene shifts to a dark forest, where a pack of white wolves sits quietly. Irene, in her pink dress, holds up 2 fingers with a smile, telling someone not to forget. Standing among the docile wolves, Irene realizes with the start that it's already nighttime. A sudden sound makes Irene gasp and whirl around in the dark woods. She stumbles precariously on the edge of a rocky cliff. Trying to steady herself on the crumbling edge, Irene thinks she'll be there in no time if she just goes straight. With a happy smile, she loses her footing and falls backwards, excitedly thinking about finally meeting His Majesty. A close-up shows Irene's blissfully unaware and joyful expression as she falls. Back in the palace, Fiage's determined promise to find Chappie echoes in Salem's mind. Salem looks up with a flicker of hope, his eyes wide as he asks if she can really find him. Fiage thinks to herself that she honestly has no plan, but knows she can't tell him that. Touching her cheek, Fiage nervously tells Ramsul she's sure her idea will work. Ramsul smirks, teasingly pointing out that she's the one with no plan as Fiage forces a smile. Fiage glances to the side with a questioning, as if noticing something. She looks over to see Salem glaring at them with red, resentful eyes. Fiage and Ramsul stand before the resentful Salem. Ramsul explains that it's the day before the Harvest Festival and he must attend to official business. Fiage gestures impatiently at Ramsul, clearly annoyed, as Salem watches them from the side. The bespectacled man urges Ramsul, telling him it's time to go. As Ramsul turns to leave, Fiage watches in disbelief, thinking, he's leaving? Salem looks down, resigned, thinking he knew his brother wouldn't help him anyway. Fiage turns to Salem with a kind, reassuring smile, ready to take matters into her own hands. The next day dawns over the towering palace. Out in public and cloaked, Fiage and Salem listen as someone says they aren't sure if what they saw was a rabbit, prompting Fiage to ask about going to town. Fiage decides they should go look for him, but a hesitant Salem warns that the town will likely be crowded. The scene transitions to a view of the town, nestled by a river at the foot of sprawling green mountains. Amidst the crowded harvest festival, a man notes the expected hustle and bustle, while a woman beside him marvels at the sheer number of people. Thump. Fiage, cloaked and concerned, turns to ask a quiet Lord Salem if he is okay. Ah. Startled by the crowd, Fiage looks back to see a distressed Salem pulling at his hood. Fiage grabs Salem's hand, firmly telling him it's not safe for them to be separated. From above, the two cloaked figures navigate the cobblestone streets, which are teeming with festival-goers under colorful banners. Salem observes that the streets are packed, but Fiage stops him, telling him to wait. As her boots halt on the ground, Fiage considers the guard's words. Looking towards a dark and ominous forest, she wonders aloud if Chappie could be in there. Salem holds her hand tightly, cautioning her that they can't be sure of that yet. A pair of elegant, gold-trimmed boots steps firmly onto the cobblestone street. Ramsul appears, cloaked in royal blue, and apologizes for being late, surprising Fiage. Fiage's face lights up as she happily exclaims, "You came!" while Salem watches from behind her. Salem looks down, his expression clouded with bitterness and resentment. As Fiage and Ramsul stand together, she is confused by a sudden shift in the air, imagining a shattering effect as Ramsul looks grimly ahead. Shaking, a resentful Salem mutters, "I don't know." Surrounded by a menacing dragon aura, Salem furiously accuses Fiage of being happy to see Ramsul. He continues his outburst, shouting that she must think he's unreliable, as Fiage desperately tries to calm him down. Fiage reaches out, telling him to wait, but Ramsul pulls her back protectively. Ramsul internally analyzes the situation, noting that Salem's body is vulnerable and the severity and frequency of his relapses are unprecedented. As a vision of a suffering Salem appears, Ramsul continues his thought, stating the short interval is unheard of in history, while Fiage looks on in horror. Fiage panics, imagining the catastrophic scene of Salem's disease running rampant and causing chaos at the crowded festival. Fiage and Salem stand opposite each other on the stone street. A woman smirks as Salem, consumed by rage, screams that Fiage is scared of him and can't stand him, before collapsing to the ground in despair. A hand reaches out toward a shocked and vulnerable Fiage. Swoosh! Ramsul swiftly pulls Fiage into his arms, shielding her as she stares up at him in surprise, realizing he's protecting her. As Salem lunges toward them, a terrified Fiage thinks that at this rate, Ramsul will be hurt. A woman's foot, clad in a red shoe, steps purposefully from behind a hedge. Thwack! A woman in a pink dress delivers a swift kick to Salem's head, knocking him out cold. A chibi flashback comically replays the kick as Salem collapses, unconscious on the cobblestones. The pink-haired woman looks down at her hand, pointing accusingly as she says, "You." A close-up shows the elegant pink and white dress of the mysterious newcomer. The pink-haired woman stands over the unconscious Salem as the stunned Fiage and Ramsul look on. With a bright, disarming smile, the pink-haired woman turns to Fiage and asks if she's all right. Fiage and Ramsul stare in disbelief at the sudden and violent intervention. The pink-haired woman points forward with a determined, accusatory expression. She points directly at a dazed Salem, who can only manage a confused "ah," while Fiage looks on, equally bewildered. Fiage recognizes the girl, thinking that her pink hair and appearance match the description of her. Fiage grimaces, remembering the comical chibi image of the girl kicking Salem. Surrounded by pink roses, Fiage thinks that this girl is very different from her description in the novel. The pink-haired woman smiles sweetly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. A tiny, disgruntled Fiage peeks out from the roses, thinking the girl isn't just different, she's not even close to the original character. Ramsul gently cups Fiage's face, his expression full of concern as he asks if she's hurt. Touching her cheek where his hand was, Fiage thinks with a blush how kind Ramsul is for protecting her again. The pink-haired woman stretches her arms leisurely, while Fiage, Ramsul, and Salem watch. Suddenly, a white rabbit appears in a magical glow, and a delighted Salem reaches out to it. The pink-haired woman kneels down, asking if the rabbit is his, as Salem tenderly holds his beloved Chappie. She cheerfully explains that she saved the bunny after it was chased by a bear, showing a flashback of the terrified rabbit and a roaring bear. The woman is shown fearlessly facing down a massive snarling bear, leaving Fiage and Ramsul to ask in shock, "What? A bear?" The pink-haired woman beams, explaining to Salem that she brought his rabbit all the way to him. In a hazy memory, a gray-haired man smiles gently at a pink-haired Fiage. Fiage smiles peacefully, looking lovely in a formal pink dress and elegant ruby necklace. The memory continues, showing Fiage and the man sharing a happy moment as he holds a white rabbit. In the present, Ramsul and Irene watch from a distance, with Irene thinking how nice the scene is. Ramsul's gaze sharpens as he notices Fiage, thinking about her pale pink hair. He recalls a past moment, looking at Irene while thinking about the prophesied healing maiden. Despite looking at the silver-haired Irene, a description of the maiden having lovely light pink hair comes to mind. Watching the pink-haired Fiage, Ramsul wonders if she could be the healing maiden. Irene confirms his suspicion with a smile, but internally notes that Fiage is nothing like the character in the original novel. Ramsul approaches the unsuspecting Fiage and her companion, sternly demanding to know her name. After his abrupt question, Ramsul turns and walks away with a grim expression. Irene watches him go, internally monologuing that everything is going according to her plan. Ramsul clenches his fist, thinking that with the healing maiden found, his own marriage will be cancelled. Irene watches him leave, a look of cool determination on her face. Internally, Irene reasons that if she marries Ramsul, her life is secure, and this outcome erases the irregularities she caused, fitting her plan perfectly. She reflects, however, that she spent too much time with Ramsul, and realizes he isn't a person who would kill someone easily. With the maiden found, Irene concludes she is no longer needed by Ramsul and must decide where to go next. She smiles to herself, thinking that a quiet, secluded life would be nice. As Irene waves goodbye, she cries out in pain when someone suddenly grabs her arm from behind. A furious Ramsul drags her away as she cries out his title, asking where they are going. She struggles against his grip, confused by his anger now that the Maiden of Healing has been found. Bam! He slams the door shut, trapping them in a room as he holds her fast. Tisk Ramsul roughly shoves an unnerved Irene against the wall. He slams his hand beside her head, angrily accusing her of knowing who the Maiden of Healing was all along as she feigns shock. He leans in menacingly, pinning her as he repeats his demand to know what she's talking about. Overwhelmed by his intensity, Irene remains speechless under his furious gaze. Ramsul's rage intensifies as he accuses her again of knowing the Maiden's identity for a long time. He furiously accuses her of knowing the Maiden was Fiage, and Irene stammers, unable to form a response. Irene panics, remembering the novel described Ramsul as a savage man who would kill her for revealing the truth. She recalls the novel's depiction of him killing anyone he disliked, but thinks the man before her is different. "You knew all along and said nothing," Ramsul asks, his voice laced with betrayal as he struggles for words. His anger turns to anguish as he realizes she knew about his troubled relationship with his brother and Salem. Looking away in shame, he concludes that he must have looked pathetic to her all this time. Irene frantically denies it while internally wrestling with the desperate urge to tell him everything. Her inner turmoil is agonizing. She truly wants to tell him, but is paralyzed by fear. She weighs her options, wondering if he would kill her or spare her, and considers the consequences of her silence. After a tense silence, Irene looks up with surprise as Ramsul stands with his back to her. Taryn enters the room, surprised to find Ramsul and Irene together in such a state. A flustered Ramsul covers his face, dismissing Taryn by saying, "Now is not the time." Ignoring him, Taryn calmly states that Ramsul needs to get changed, leaving Irene confused. Ramsul protests as Taryn begins to intervene. As Taryn leads Irene away from the confrontation, Ramsul watches them go, looking defeated. Alone now, Ramsul collapses heavily into a chair, his face a mask of frustration and sorrow. Irene watches Taryn leave, thinking with grim determination that she failed to tell Ramsul the truth. Later, Irene sits alone by a window, dressed in an elegant lavender gown for the evening's events. Taryn informs Irene he will escort her to the hall later before taking his leave. Once alone, Irene clutches her head in distress, wondering how she can possibly act normal around Ramsul at the party. She sinks into despair, thinking her situation is hopeless. She chides herself for being too flustered to lie, certain that Ramsul knows she deceived him and will never forgive her. She reflects on her difficult choices, wondering what else she could have done about the situation with Salem. Piaget looks down with a sigh, resigned to the belief that she will soon be executed or imprisoned. Her thoughts drift to escape as she gazes towards a window, wondering if now is the time to leave. She consoles herself with the thought that with Irene now present, things will surely improve for Salem. Picturing Salem and Irene together, Piaget reasons that her role as a background character is over. Seeing her reflection, Piaget believes she's no longer needed for the story to progress, her thoughts turning sorrowfully to Ramsul. Closing her eyes, she sadly recalls the pained expression on Ramsul's face. Piaget's resolve hardens as she decides she must leave to survive, mentally apologizing for her deception. As she tiptoes down the stairs, she accidentally knocks over and shatters a vase, reacting with a startled gasp. Losing her balance from the shock, Piaget tumbles down the grand staircase with a cry of alarm. Mid-fall, she thinks in frustration about the terrible timing of her accident. Her hand slips from the banister as she panics, realizing that if she's found injured, she won't have the strength to hide. A blonde-haired woman in a red and white dress appears at the top of the stairs. The blonde woman gasps, startled by the scene below her. Rushing to the railing, the woman looks down in shock, calling out to ask how Lady Piaget ended up in such a state. Lying injured, Piaget weakly begs for help while the blonde woman hesitates, and Piaget's thoughts identify her as Romain. Romain offers her hand, vowing to help, but Piaget hesitates, doubting the woman can pull her up alone. Grasping the railing, Piaget desperately debates whether she can trust Romain, knowing her own strength is failing. With a sinister smile hidden in shadow, Romain announces she's going to pull Piaget up. As she's lifted, a relieved Piaget gratefully thanks Romain. Suddenly, Romani lets go of her hand, leaving Piaget to question what just happened. Piaget falls backward in stunned disbelief, realizing Romain may have let her go on purpose. A close-up reveals Romain's cruel, triumphant smile as she watches Piaget plummet. The scene abruptly shifts, marking a dark turn of events. Piaget falls helplessly through a dark void, reaching out in terror. As Piaget's consciousness fades, Romain watches coldly from above, savoring the fall. Romain stands composed and serene before a lavish white carriage, the incident seemingly forgotten. Looking back at the palace, Romain resolves that she cannot lose such an important piece now. The scene changes to a sunny garden, where Salem happily points something out to a smiling Irene. The narrative voice wonders who the woman with Salem is, as Irene beams with joy. From Piaget's listening perspective, two maids gossip, identifying Irene as the Shisha family's daughter, whom Piaget herself encouraged the emperor to invite. Peeking from behind a pillar, Romain glares with fury, her thoughts focused on Piaget. Imagining Irene with a white-haired man, a narrator finds the situation suspicious. The two maids react with surprise, agreeing enthusiastically to their lady's request. Romain is shown holding a small, dark jar sealed with a blue ribbon. With a gentle smile, Romain reassures someone off-screen that it's fine because they are friends. Romain walks through the courtyard, her two maids following behind her. Looking up from below, Romain stands before an ornate, closed chest. Now standing outside a room, Romain wonders if her target is inside. Romain peeks into the room from the doorway, calling out for Lady Piaget. The scene flashes back to Piaget, who calls out from the bottom of the stairs to a surprised Romain. Looking down from the top of the stairs, Romain feigns shock, asking Piaget how she fell. A wicked glint appears in Romain's eyes, as she realizes this is the perfect chance to act. Romain extends her hand, feigning a stutter as she offers to help Piaget. Piaget looks up from her crumpled position on the floor, appearing helpless. As Piaget questions her, Romani internally justifies her actions with the sarcastic thought that she really tried to help. Romain watches Piaget fall, thinking with satisfaction that the nuisance is finally gone. As she loses consciousness, Piaget accepts that she is going to die. In her final moments, Piaget's hand reaches out toward the silhouette of a man in a formal black robe, walking away. A stern Ramsul appears in a doorway, demanding to know the cause of the commotion. A panicked Salem bursts into the room, shouting for his uncle. Salem frantically explains to Ramsul that Piaget fell out of her room window. Ramsul reels back in utter shock at the horrifying news. As Ramsul demands to know where she is, Salem tells him she's in her room. Ramsul sprints down the corridor, his face a mask of desperation. Guilt grips Ramses as he runs, wondering if his earlier accusations caused her to fall. Bursting into the room and shouting Piaget's name, Ramsul is stunned to see a doctor and Irene already there. Piaget lies still and unconscious in her bed, the room silent. Ramsul stares down at the unresponsive Piaget, calling her name in disbelief as a doctor looks on. Looking distraught, Ramsul demands to know what is happening and how Fiage is. Fiage groans and covers her mouth, showing the first sign of waking up. The full scene reveals Ramsul, the doctor, Irene, and Salem gathered anxiously around Fiage's bed. Ramsul pinches the bridge of his nose, overwhelmed with stress and worry. Looking down with remorse, Irene claims that it's all her fault. A flashback shows Irene and Salem looking up in horror as Fiage plummets from the tower, with Irene screaming her name. In the flashback, Irene sprints desperately towards the spot where Fiage is about to land. A close-up shows Irene's red heels pounding against the cobblestones as she runs. With a heroic leap, Irene catches Fiage just before she hits the ground. As Irene struggles to secure her grip midair, she thinks she might not make it. Irene lands safely, holding a stunned but unharmed Fiage in her arms. Returning to the present, Irene asks a shaken Fiage if she's okay, while Salem watches with concern. The doctor calmly reports that Fiage is only experiencing nausea and has no external injuries. Fiage smiles weakly from her bed, apologizing for causing so much trouble. Ramsul breathes a sigh of immense relief, thankful she's all right. Overcome with emotion, Ramsul collapses to his knees beside Fiage's bed. Looking up at her from the floor, Ramsul reaches for Fiage's hand. Fiage gasps in surprise as Ramsul firmly grasps her hand. Holding her hand tenderly, Ramsul expresses his profound relief that she is okay. Fiage watches Ramsul from her bed, while a conflicted Salem looks on from the background. Ramsul continues to hold Fiage's hand, his gaze locked with hers. The tender moment is broken, as Salem and Ramsul exchange a tense, silent stare. Blushing and looking away, Salem dismisses the unspoken tension, saying it's nothing. Fiage lies in bed, a faint, thoughtful smile on her face. Fiage awakens more fully, apologizing to a man named Taran for making him worry, and he expresses his relief. As Ramsul rises, Taran puts a hand on his shoulder, trying to stop him. Irene tells Salem they'll go with him, and they both excuse themselves to give Fiage some rest. Fiage smiles brightly, thanking them for their help. Irene smiles warmly, wishing Fiage a good rest before she leaves. Ramsul resolutely declares that he is going to stay with Fiage. Taran protests, exclaiming that it's unheard of for the pre-festival to be held without His Majesty. Ramsul gently takes Fiage's hand, telling her they need to talk later. He softly strokes her hair, his touch gentle as she looks up at him. A blushing Fiage contemplates Ramsul's promise to talk later, her heart fluttering. Ramsul turns to find Romaine standing silently in the hallway. Romaine clutches her hand, showing a faint scratch on her skin. Ramsul instructs Taran to tend to her injuries, and the doctor agrees. Taran directs a maid to care for Lady Romaine's injuries, who looks on with feigned concern. As the men turn their backs, Romaine's expression twists into a triumphant, sinister smile. Ramsul walks purposefully down the corridor, his expression grim and determined. Ramsul holds Fiage's hand tightly, his face contorted with overwhelming relief and lingering pain. In a flashback, Ramsul recalls his heart stopping with fear when he heard she fell from the window. The memory fades as a gentle, warm smile appears on Ramsul's face. He covers his mouth in embarrassment, overwhelmed by a sudden rush of emotion. Later, Fiage is surprised by a late-night visitor, calling out Taran's name and worrying something happened to Salem before inviting him inside. Taran enters her bedroom as Fiage sits up anxiously, asking him if something is wrong. The brown-haired man with glasses smiles, saying he just came to check on her and asks how she's feeling. Fiage smiles gratefully, thanking Taran for visiting and reassuring him that she feels much better. Taran expresses his relief and reminds her of the Harvest Festival tomorrow, relaying His Majesty's hope that she can attend without overdoing it. After he speaks, Fiage clenches her fist with a look of quiet determination. Her expression turns serious as she contemplates Taran's message. Looking down at her bed, Fiage quietly mutters a name, Lim. She quickly dismisses the thought, with a bright smile, insisting it was nothing. Taran bids her farewell, saying he looks forward to seeing her and has arranged for another doctor's visit tomorrow. Alone in her vast bed, Fiage hugs herself, looking small and lost in thought. She recalls Ramsul's earlier fury, marveling that she is somehow still alive. A memory of Ramsul's anguished face as he shouted her name flashes through her mind, showing his deep worry. The realization of his concern leaves Fiage looking startled and confused. Lying in bed, she questions her perceptions, wondering if she's confused and has it all wrong. She jolts upright, chiding herself for her wishful thinking and wondering what has gotten into her. Burying her blushing face in a pillow, she feels utterly lost, unsure of what to think anymore. As Fiahe finally drifts off to sleep, Ramsul quietly watches over her from the side of her bed. He gently brushes a stray hair from her sleeping face, thinking she looks much better now. In a dream, Fiahe sees a gentle, smiling Ramsul and thinks his name. Ramsul's soft smile lingers as he continues his silent vigil. Half asleep, Fiahe vaguely registers a presence, thinking she should wake up but is too tired to try. A new day dawns, showing the grand castle bathed in morning light. With a big stretch and a yawn, Hwa! Fiahe wakes up, feeling like she slept well. She muses that she dreamt Ramsul came to see her, then looks down with a start. She discovers Ramsul asleep, his head resting on the edge of her bed. Blushing furiously, Fiahe reels back in shock, realizing Ramsul is actually in her room. She hesitates, wondering if she should wake the sleeping Ramsul. Ramsul stirs and opens his eyes, calmly noting that she is awake. Fiahe stammers a yes, and he softly asks how she is feeling. She beams brightly, assuring him that she is all better now. He reaches out to touch her cheek, and she gasps in surprise at his gentle gesture. Ramsul looks at her with a soft, serious expression. Blushing, Fiahe thinks that she recognizes this warmth from her dream. Flustered, she pulls away slightly, insisting that she's fine. Ramsul smiles gently, advising her not to push herself too hard. He offers to call the maids for her, and a still flustered Fiahe stammers out her thanks. As he moves away, Fiahe is touched by his kindness, noting he doesn't seem angry at all. She puzzles over his behavior, then remembers the feeling of his hand on her cheek. The memory makes her flush, and she cups her blushing face in her hands. Her attention is drawn to her bedside table, where she spots a mysterious jar and wonders what it is. Picking up the dark jar, sealed with a blue ribbon, Fiahe examines it with a puzzled expression. A memory of Romaine's face surfaces, and Fiahe thinks her name. Holding the jar, Fiage's expression remains one of deep confusion. She flashes back to Romaine offering the jar, wondering if this was the reason for her visit. Fiahe's thoughts swirl as she recalls the incident, a fragmented memory of Romane's grasp, making her question if she's remembering it wrong. Dressed for bed, Fiahe stands pensively, with her arms crossed. Lost in thought, she turns with a start, surprised by a visitor and calling out Salem's name. Her expression falls slightly as she looks down at the jar Romaine gave her. In a flashback, Romaine hands over the jar, saying it smells like herbal tea, and Fiahe accepts it. Later, a maid helps a finely dressed Fiahe prepare for the harvest festival. Sipping the tea, Fiahe finds the taste funny but dismisses it as medicinal, wondering if Salem is also drinking it. Having drunk too much of the tea, she slumps onto a table, worried about drinking more at the festival. A narrator explains the harvest festival tradition of drinking wine, showing a dapper man raising his glass. Fiahe looks unwell and groggy, clearly feeling the effects of the tea. The doctor arrives to check on Lady Fiahe, asking how she's feeling. Noticing the aroma from her cup, the doctor asks Fiahe what she's been drinking. Fiahe presents the jar she received from Roman, asking the doctor if he recognizes it. The doctor examines the contents, guessing it might be an old herb once used as a smelling salt. Confused by his explanation, Fiahe asks him what he means. He explains that warriors drank it to become invigorated for battle, with records of even more concentrated versions being used. Fiahe stares at the jar, her mind racing, as she wonders why Romani would give her something like this. She remembers Romaine gave some to Salem as well, leaving her completely baffled by the situation. The doctor takes his leave, telling Fiahe he'll let her be. Alone, Fiage's mind is troubled by Romaine's suspicious words and actions. Certain the tea was no ordinary gift, her thoughts then drift to the intense encounter she had with Ramsul the day before. With newfound resolve, Fiahe determines that she must have a proper conversation with him. She looks up with a slightly startled expression, as if called or interrupted. The scene shifts to an outdoor garden party for the harvest festival, where Fiahe is seen in a beautiful blue gown. Now, in her yellow gown, Fiahe clutches her hands to her chest, feeling nervous and trying to calm herself down. She grabs her head in frustration, lamenting her frazzled state on this important morning. Her worries fade as she spots Ramsul, looking regal and commanding in his formal uniform. She's awestruck by his handsome appearance as the king, wondering if she's even worthy to stand by his side. Ramsul turns to her, a subtle, charming smile playing on his lips. He offers her his arm, and a blushing Fiahe nervously accepts. As she takes his arm, she senses something more than just kindness in his attitude today. She looks up at him, her heart skipping a beat as she wonders why he's affecting her so much. Lost in the moment, she dazedly questions if Ramsul has always looked this cool, overwhelmed with nerves. A blushing Fiancé clutches her face, unsure of what to do. Standing beside him, she finds it impossible to concentrate, completely captivated by his presence. Ramsul and Fiancé stand together, becoming the focus of the surrounding nobles' attention. Ramsul gives a brief toast, welcoming everyone and encouraging them to enjoy the festivities before simply saying, "Thank you." Fiancé is stunned by his short speech, thinking he could have at least tried to sound more cheerful. She notes how his serious demeanor has made everyone tense, but then reasons it must be like this every year. When Ramsul personally offers her a glass of wine, she's touched and amazed, thinking he's such a gentleman. Gulp, gulp, gulp. She drinks the wine as Ramsul and a slightly concerned Terran watch her. Across the garden, Romaine mingles effortlessly with other nobles, a bright smile on her face. A group of nobles gathers around Romain, who is clearly enjoying the attention. Fiancé's thoughts darken as she connects Romaine's tea to the fall that nearly killed her. Romaine approaches, adorned with blue flowers, her smile unwavering. Watching her, Fiancé grows wary, wondering how Romaine can act so pleasant after what she did. Fiancé lets out a small shriek as she suddenly loses her balance. Ramsul swiftly catches her, pulling her against him. Blushing furiously with dizzy eyes, Fiancé panics at their sudden proximity, thinking, he's so close. Nearby nobles gossip about whether His Majesty truly favors Fiancé, calling her an illegitimate child, before one woman smirks that she might become queen to a monster. He smirking, purple-haired noble decides he will go have a word with her. Two nobles respectfully greet the blonde-haired Romaine, addressing her as Your Holiness. A courtier reports that Lady Fiancé tried to kill herself, leaving the blonde-haired Romaine looking shocked. Two nobles react in shock to the news, with one thinking it is to be expected of the Saintess. Romaine calmly suggests that Lady Fiancé must be troubled by something. The nobles speculate that the pressure of being an illegitimate child in her position is likely the cause. Romaine thinks to herself that too much pressure can indeed destroy a person. Elsewhere, a group of nobles, including the purple-haired man, celebrate with wine. Romaine warns the nobles that making assumptions could be disrespectful and cause trouble. The nobles praise Lady Romaine's wisdom, contrasting it with Lady Fiancé's perceived weakness. Internally, Romaine scoffs at the foolish nobles. She smiles, her cunning plan unfolding perfectly. A narration reveals her thoughts. A troubled woman is unfit to be queen and would only stir opposition. Her plan is to drive a wedge between Ramsul and Irene, making their relationship collapse under pressure. With their bond broken by opposition, she reasons there would be no reason for them to marry. As Romaine muses on becoming queen, a sudden scream interrupts her thoughts. The scream came from Irene, who has stumbled into Ramsul's arms. Ramsul holds Irene securely, their faces only inches apart. Irene wants to escape, feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the scrutinizing glares of Romaine and the nobles. Terran approaches, politely thanking His Majesty for his time the other day. Irene smiles awkwardly, having no idea what they're discussing, while Ramsul looks on. Ramsul's expression turns stern as he silently glares at Terran. As Ramsul watches, Irene nervously sips her wine. Irene thinks to herself that perhaps it's best to stop whatever is happening now. Feeling bloated and unable to join the awkward conversation, Irene resorts to drinking more wine. Clutching her throat, Irene feels she can't drink anymore and begins to look unwell. A crowd of nobles watches the unfolding drama from a distance. Ramsul glances back toward the crowd, his expression unreadable. Dizzy and unsteady, Irene apologizes to Ramsul, admitting she's at her limit. Ramsul turns to face the ailing Irene as the surrounding nobles look on with concern. Overcome with dizziness, Irene stumbles forward. A concerned Ramsul rushes to her side, asking if she is all right. He catches her, his arm around her waist as she blushes from the proximity. Ramsul looks down at Irene with a surprisingly gentle expression. A soft, subtle smile graces his lips as he gazes at her. The nobles are stunned, wondering how His Majesty could show such an expression. Ramsul pulls the dizzy Irene into a protective embrace. Watching them, a determined Romaine decides she must intervene immediately. Romaine rushes forward and grabs Irene, causing Irene's wine to spill. A red wine stain spreads across the front of Romain's own dress as she looks down in feigned shock. Horrified by the accident, Irene stammers an apology to Romaine. Ramsul supports the mortified and unsteady Irene. Addressing the crowd, Ramsul excuses himself and tells everyone to enjoy the party. He effortlessly lifts Irene into his arms and carries her away, leaving a stunned Romaine behind. Romani seethes internally, furious at being ignored but realizing she can use Fiage's attack to her advantage. How cruel, Romaine cries out as nobles rush to her side, fussing over her precious stained dress. With a sweet smile, Romaine graciously thanks them for their concern. The nobles sympathize, calling her a poor thing, and saying Irene was just trying to help. That's not true. Taryn shouts, insisting that anyone can see Lady Fiage was clearly at fault. Romaine cuts him off, graciously insisting that it was not Irene's fault. Taryn tells a brown-haired noble that he's had doubts about Lady Fiage for some time, and the man agrees, incensed that she interrupted the festival. Romaine internally gloats that the nobles are still on her side. Just as she predicted, a silver-haired noble and a pink-haired woman approach the blonde-haired Romaine, with the man asking if she is all right. With a gentle smile, Romaine begins to thank him for his concern. Her words are cut off as the pink-haired woman suddenly shouts at her, leaving Romaine looking shocked. Completely bewildered by the sudden hostility, Roman wonders what is wrong with her. The pink-haired woman apologizes with a sarcastic smile, saying she thought Lady Romaine might have bad hearing. Romaine's sweet facade crumbles instantly, replaced by a look of silent, seething fury.